Hola, muito obrigado pela honra de participar desta celebração. Thanks very much for the honour of participating in this celebration. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss some of the issues in occupational therapy as I see them. I'm going to talk about some of the social questions that affect the UK and how I see social occupational therapy as a means of addressing the vulnerabilities which underline the health divides here, as well as something of the personal inspiration I have drawn from this approach to the profession, and how, in one way, we might turn the flow of epistemology upside down like Mafalda here, from the global south to the global north. In these slides, I'm going to present an outline. There is more detail and more links in the notes underneath each one, so I hope you'll have the time to look at these later on. Basically about what this means in relation to practice. Occupational therapy is one of the health professions that concerns how people do, be and become and belong to society. We might argue that we can't change the system we work in, and it's not our professional role to do so. Let's just get on with the job we've got to do. But the problem is that this supposes that the people at the top of the pyramid see the value of everyone underneath them. Social occupational therapy works with those who are vulnerable. The poorest parts of the pyramid are a result of the social and economic conditions and must have social and economic solutions. People might have medical conditions. The reason they have them is because they're kept in a position of vulnerability in our society. The expectations of the wealthier parts of the pyramid is that health workers and occupational therapists amongst them will manage these problems and prevent them from becoming too great or too visible. That's a problem of practice. If we're working with the people, how do we square this with working for the establishment or the hegemony? If we want to consider how occupation works, we have to think about it being more than just labour relations. Occupational therapists often say they're holistic, and we have to recognise that what we do is a response to other things in the world and responses in others in the process of doing and becoming and belonging. Social occupational therapy and other forms of socially committed discussion around occupational therapy might seem to be something akin to a new social movement. They're led by professionals working with vulnerable people, but they're middle-class professionals with middle-class concerns and aspirations. They are often people who in many respects are unable to take directly political action because they're health professionals. Alejandro Guajardo from Chile would take issue with this position. We have to work with realities such as the great diversity of experience in our communities, and this suggests that occupational therapy needs to engage with the social in ways that have not been previously developed. Perhaps as a social movement, certainly as occupational therapies. At the time the Brazilian occupational therapy was developing, in the late 60s, this film, Kes, was being made just up the road from where I live in 1969. So it's almost as old as Brazilian occupational therapy. And while the poverty it depicts is relative rather than a global context, what it shows has largely continued in Britain to the present day. Most recently, the Marmot report has revealed the extent of health inequality in UK and how it's been continuous even since before the Second World War. What this means is that there are differences in life expectancy which might seem quite high actually in Latin American terms, but nonetheless these represent significant differences within our country. In Jaywick Sands, which is the picture here, it's one of the most impoverished parts of the UK, and a boy born there might experience 51 years of good health at the moment. The town has the highest rate of self-harm in the country, and it shows very much that where you live affects your quality of life and access to good health. In Sheffield, where I live, you can see these two trajectories. The light blue one is the one around the affluent area near the university, and the dark green one is about 6 kilometres away in the Manor Estate. You can see a life expectancy difference of 19 years, between 73 and 92. So you can literally just take the bus across the city, in a city that's the ninth largest economy in the world, and improve your life expectancy by 20 years, from a life expectancy akin to somebody living in Algeria or Jamaica to one of the highest life expectancies in the world. That difference in life expectancy has a historical dimension. The pattern of deprivation follows the pattern of industrial development over the Industrial Revolution. The blue arrow shows where the first iron workings were in the Sheffield area in the 1200s. The red areas on the first map are the areas of highest poverty. The dark green areas are those with the most wealth. And you can see in the purple map there are the dark areas are those where people are most likely to be on income support. The dark brown areas in the brown map are the areas where people have the shortest life expectancy, and in the map in the corner, the red areas again are the areas that are least desirable when you're buying a property. Areas of high crime, areas of multiple deprivation, and areas where the prevailing west wind blows the city's pollution to the east. So underneath the blue arrow along the M1 corridor is one of the highest rates of pollution in Europe. Most Sheffield housing outside the red areas is unaffordable for people on the average wage in the UK. This kind of historical inequality in access was something that the NHS was developed to address. There's a principle of being free at the point of delivery, so free to all. But with an ageing population and increasing disability amongst younger people, the service needs to change. There is not going to be enough government funding to support the increasing demands on the service. So a number of plans have been put in place, the 5-year forward view and the NHS long-term plan, which moves services into the community and moves services into networks of doctors' practices, and they will enable the prescription of social activities such as exercise classes or adult education, working with allied health professionals such as occupational therapists. This has particularly excited AHPs and occupational therapists, and community services will depend very much on links with voluntary and charity sector groups as well as other local services. It may be possible in this context to develop projects and interventions around the vulnerabilities in communities using a social occupational therapy model. A number of reports show that health and vulnerabilities are interlinked in the UK, and that some of the key poverty in both wealth and opportunities. Issues which are more to do with citizenship, empowerment, but if people are persuaded to act on them, they will have the effect of reducing the impact of health conditions and improving health as well as enhancing communities. So, the time is right for the introduction of social occupational therapy to the global north, or at least in the UK. I first encountered social occupational therapy while editing the first edition of Occupational Therapy Without Borders. It seemed to me to relate to the inequalities in the UK and to answer with proposals for action the fundamental problem that had been nagging me since I first trained over 30 years ago. How could the occupational therapy community relate itself beyond the confines of the clinical milieu to the context of the world outside in which patients live? At the time, I was working in a community psychiatric service, and the team I worked with, while often dealing with people in a state of near crisis, perpetual near crisis, were actually addressing the issues of poverty and deprivation and the structural violence which is meted out to that invisible population which does not fit within dominant conventions, those people who have severe and enduring mental illness and who are dealing with benefits, regulations in council tax, strange and sudden increases in their bills from companies that are not accountable. All these issues created additional stresses and pressures on top of their underlying mental health conditions. The actions which social occupational therapy offers are ways to deliver projects which are centred in experiences of relatively extreme poverty, and the areas in Doncaster were some of the most deprived in the UK, in the sort of bottom sort of 10% or even 5% of figures of poverty in the UK. There are areas of vulnerability, chronic intergenerational need, intergenerational unemployment, and social occupational therapy is about working with local populations to address those local needs, in which the focus social factors that often contribute to poor health, but realised through practical action in the community. The role of the occupational therapist, however, and other health that need to manage the fear of the hegemony from the threat posed by the people it marginalises. So it's about not necessarily rendering the marginalised visible, but keeping them invisible. The questions that social occupational therapy asks of us open a testing ground for those clinical skills and critical knowledge to be moved into the social, cultural and economic sphere, where they will be challenged by the experiences of the people we work with. So we can't be complacent about our uniqueness and our holism, but we need to show that we can act with them in changing the determinants of health together. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the editors of Social Occupational Therapy, for the inspiration that they've given me through my academic career. It was, as I say, working with the initial chapters to Occupational Therapy Without Borders, which opened my eyes really to the possibilities of forms of action that occupational therapists could take that did address some of the political and social realities which I was certainly aware of as a clinician and through my other experiences. So we've tried to include something of that in everything we've published as in the Occupational Therapy Without Borders series, and it's been influential on a lot of the other work that I've done. So I am so pleased to be working with a team of writers in the European Citizenship Group to have a chapter in this Social Occupational Therapy book. For a couple of us who've been travelling alongside this community, it feels like coming home actually to be there. So I'd like to say again, thanks very much for the opportunity to participate in today's celebration, and I look forward to taking part in the panel later. Thank you very much.